In this session, we'll be discussing the fruitional view. It's a difficult discussion because it refers to experiences that are very difficult to ever adequately describe with language, but we'll do our best. The term fruition comes from another Buddhist organizing principle, which is ground, path, fruition. Ground traditionally means where we're starting from. What do we experience right now? What's the truth of our experience right now? Fruition is where we want to be, our goal, the direction we want to go in, how we would like things to be. And the path, of course, is how we get from here to there. What are the things we might do to move in that direction? In Vajrayana Buddhism, in a way that can seem somewhat paradoxical, the ground and the fruition are considered essentially the same. Our immediate experience, as it is what we're going to find out to be the whole point, to be present with reality as we experience it. But we could say that from this point of view, the ground, the way we find things, is experienced as if it is the whole story, as if it's completely real. And, as we will discuss, usually we will find that there is a constant self-referential commentary that we add to our immediate experiencing. The fruitional experience of being present in our immediate experience arises in a context or a wider experience of awareness. When we experience the display of our experience, the content of our experience, and simultaneously are aware that this is what we are experiencing, it's very difficult to take this display, our thoughts, our feelings, our sensations, our ideas, as if they're the whole story, as if they somehow completely represent reality. So the difference from the ground and the fruition from this point of view is basically that the ground is our experience without awareness. The fruition is our experience in the environment or context of awareness. The path, therefore, has something of a paradoxical quality in that from the more relative ground point of view, we have to do this work if we want to have a shift in our experiencing arise. We meditate, we do different practices, we study, we think about things, and we hope that it will be helpful. From the fruitional point of view or experience, we look back and see all of those practices were not going to cause anything. They were not actually necessary, but we understand why we did them. But we don't take sides. We don't say, oh, I guess I need to do this work, or gosh, that work is meaningless, you don't need to do it. In fact, we gradually train ourselves to tolerate holding contradictory thoughts and feelings, energies simultaneously, giving up any fantasy of resolution. So from that point of view, we gradually learn to hold our immediate experiencing with our tendency to take it very seriously, and simultaneously having more and more frequent moments of not taking it so seriously. We're not dismissing it, we're not making it wrong, we're just gradually learning that what we have spent most of our life taking our identity from trying to improve, trying to change, is not going to get us somewhere else. So this whole approach is not about improving the content of our experience. It's more about a shift in how we relate to any experience we have at any moment. An image might be we're walking down the street and past a big picture window, the sun is shining, and the glass seems very opaque. We don't see into the house. We walk another 10 feet, and because the angle of reflection changes, all of a sudden we see into the house. The glass is transparent. The glass hasn't changed, the sun hasn't changed, we haven't changed, It's only our perspective that has shifted. So to take that metaphor a little bit further, we could say that at first, that opaqueness actually has something to do with sensing that the world is reflecting back something about us. It's coming back to us. When we see through the apparent solidity that's there, our attention goes out. It doesn't bounce back to us. So I've used the language that the difference between the ground and the fruition is that it's the same experience, but with or without conscious awareness as the larger environment or context. So perhaps it would be helpful to try to talk a little bit about the nature of awareness, although that can never be really completely satisfying. Awareness is usually talked about in metaphor because it can't be completely captured or defined. One common metaphor is that awareness is like space. It's not space, but it's like space. Space accommodates everything. A space can accommodate an airplane, a butterfly, pollution, clouds. We're never going to actually be able to get a hold of space itself, though. Another common metaphor would be that awareness is like the sun. There's a constant aliveness that goes to everything without bias. The sun's energy goes to a little baby or it goes to a murderer. It goes out into empty space. The sun doesn't seem to have an agenda. Awareness is said to be without bias. We're just as ready to be aware of feeling happy as we are aware of being sad, aware of being healthy or aware of dying. Awareness doesn't have a bias. It's always there. Some other metaphors that could at least point in the direction of what we're trying to discuss. We could say that awareness could be considered to be like light. We're never going to experience light directly. We only experience light as it interacts with matter. So we could imagine perhaps metaphorically being like a stained glass window where the energy of awareness is animating, enlivening that display, but the only thing that we consciously can ever get a hold of is the display itself, all the colors. So to the extent that we are still trying to define ourselves, hang on to a formula for having the best quality of life or protecting ourselves, then of course we will have a tendency to try to hang on to what we can hang on to, which is the constant display of our experience. We'll never be able to get a hold of gravity. We can only experience gravity through our experience of the pull downward, our muscles, and so forth. We'll never experience our breath directly. We only experience our breath through changes in temperature, our chest expanding, feeling the rush of something against our skin. But we can never get a hold of our breath itself. So a lot of practices, of course, talk about following your breath, but we don't usually examine closely the possibility that we'll never get a hold of our breath. We can never follow our breath. We can only follow the interaction of this ungraspable experience as it interacts with our senses. So the only way we can really talk about awareness, try to get a hold of it, is basically in the realm of our experiencing, our sensory experiencing. But a Buddhist view is that awareness actually is always present. It's nothing that's created. It's nothing that we achieve or create or attain. And the only thing that turns out to be aware of awareness is awareness itself. That sounds a little abstract, but that's how it's said sometimes. The actual shift in experience, though, seems to result, for most people who describe it, as immediately giving rise to an incredible relaxation, confidence, clarity, a sense of humor, a sense of open-heartedness. So there seems to be a very consistent report about the effects of experiencing this constant display of our thoughts, feelings, sensations, and so forth in the larger environment of awareness, even if we can never get a hold of that experience. It can be actually experienced, but it just can never be grasped. So, from a fruitional point of view, a lot of our path has this paradoxical quality that we're doing it, but gradually, more and more and more, we start to understand that what we are doing is only happening in the present moment. It's not actually designed to create something in the future. We're not trying to achieve enlightenment or wakefulness. It's already here. And our work gradually becomes less effortful and more the intention to relax over and over again into what is already present. That can be talked about, but it's a difficult experience to really convey. The relationship between awareness and freedom is that when our experience, whatever it is, however depressed, however joyful, whatever, arises in a larger environment of awareness, there just is an experience of freedom. That's a report or an assertion. We can never prove that that's true, of course, but a fruitional approach explores the variety of ways in which we might invite over and over and over again the sense that in the present moment there's nothing that is incomplete. There's no sort of deficit. There's nothing missing. We already are the nature of freedom. Trungpa Rinpoche said that there's no such thing as an underdeveloped moment. In the West, we tend to think of freedom as an absence of limitations. So, in our culture, we feel free when we get some time off of work and can go on a vacation, when we have plenty of money, when we feel healthy and can pretty much do what we want, with the idea that's not examined that freedom is an absence of limitations. But upon examination, we'll find that's never going to get beyond a certain point. Just as embodied beings, we always are living a life of limitations. We have our bodies, we have to sleep and eat, we have to deal with the planet, we have to deal with other people. We're never going to have, on a relative level, no limitations. So a Buddhist point of view is actually, strangely, completely the opposite. That a more profound experience of freedom arises from an unconditional commitment to the truth of our experience, which on a relative level is basically a collection of limitations. The point is that by unconditionally committing to being embodied with, being kind toward whatever it is we experience, we start to relax our struggle with reality. We start to dissolve our attitude that we or life is problematic, as we discussed the last session. When we stop struggling with reality, stop complaining about it, in fact, even commit to it unconditionally, no reservations, what may happen, it's no guarantee, but what may happen is that we gradually start to dissolve our self-absorption, feel more relaxed, present, confident, and therefore it may occur to us to ask the question then, well, what is aware of all this that I'm experiencing? But when we're very involved with struggle, with accomplishment, with avoidance, our attention tends to go very much inward. It's very difficult. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult when we're running from a bear to look at the flowers. When we feel that our survival is threatened, we tend to get very contractive in our awareness. It's just a very biological response. Another way of addressing this difficult issue is to consider that meaning seems to come largely from context. We can experience, let's say, the letter A, and we think we know what it means. We add a T to it, and then it's at, and we think it means something different. We put a B in front, now it's bat. We think it means something different, that A. We put that in a sentence about sports or about furry mammals, and the meaning has changed again, and so on. Meaning seems to come largely from context. So in the more familiar sense, we're trying to put our experience in a positive context. We're trying to put ourself in an environment of positivity, which of course is very intelligent, but turns out not to be sustainable, given just the way life works. So if I am taking all of my meaning from my thoughts, my feelings, my life circumstances, if I feel like an attractive person, a rich person, if I have a secure family, then I can take my meaning about myself from those circumstances. Or on a more subtle level, if I have feelings that are positive, clear, optimistic, I take my sense of meaning about myself, I define myself in relationship to that context. Oh, I'm feeling clear and happy. I must be doing something right. I'm a good person. I'm okay. This is going okay. I'm feeling depressed. I feel, like I just got a divorce. I'm not feeling very healthy. There must be something wrong with me. But from a fruitional point of view, we move in the direction of placing all of our experience in a larger context of awareness. And as I said, the nature of awareness seems to be without bias, no agenda, no sort of choosing sides. So if we took a moment and returned to our previous discussion about the developmental view, we could see that the context of our experience is always going to be more content. Specifically, our conscious identification with our preferred experiencing is always happening in the larger context of what we have repressed or disowned, or our unconscious. So even though we do our best to have a positive sense of self, the larger context or environment of that effort will always be what we're trying not to feel. So from that point of view, this basic split is between conscious content and unconscious content. To return to the fruitional view, the content of our experience is both conscious and unconscious. It doesn't matter. We're not trying to become more conscious. We accept that we will always be a mystery to ourselves, that experience is coming up. We don't understand it, but it's there. But the larger context from the fruitional point of view is awareness. So all of our experiencing on a conscious level, on an unconscious level, our thoughts, feelings, fears, everything, is always arising in the larger environment of awareness. Our work on a fruitional point of view is to gradually dissolve what appears to be a split between the content of our experience and the environment of awareness. An example might be we go to the movies. The whole setup, of course, is to be captured immediately by this display. So within seconds, there's no choice, actually. If it's a happy movie, we laugh. If it's a sad movie, we cry. But we don't really have much choice. If we were to take that exact same movie and put it in the middle of an open field in broad daylight, we would not be captured by that movie, probably. There's a big explosion, maybe we'll look at it for a little bit, but the dogs are barking, the grass is wet, there's a plane going overhead. Everything in the environment is so much more real and vivid than this display that we don't get captured by it. It's still there. So from that point of view, we start to consider that freedom may not actually come from improving the story of our life. In fact, it might come from placing whatever that story is, in all its complexity, in a larger environment of awareness. Western therapy tends to have the idea that we have wounds, we have traumas that have to be healed, we have issues from our parents, and all of these things have to be cleared up before we can feel free. A fruitional point of view asserts that it doesn't really matter what the display is. If it's in an environment of open awareness, we're not going to get captured or identified with that display. We have choice about how to relate to it. It's not the whole story. And in fact, it's not even about us. So it's an idea, a view that's not too familiar to some people, which is that perhaps freedom does not arise out of self-improvement. Self-improvement, in fact, perhaps is never going to give rise to freedom. It's only going to give rise to an improved display of our experiencing, which in itself is very valuable, and in our next session we'll talk about how it's helpful even from a fruitional point of view. But it's very different. A Buddhist point of view is more that freedom arises from a profound disidentification, not repression, but disidentification with any display, good or bad. Another way to approach this somewhat abstract language of awareness, freedom, is to talk about the practice of immediacy. If we understand that most of us generate a state of mind that appears to be continuous and about us and significant, we do this actually by linking moments of experience together as if they have to be related to other moments of experience. So I will say something that perhaps wasn't skillful. The next moment I feel some embarrassment arise. And then the next moment I'm linking my experience of embarrassment to having said something awkward. And then the next moment I have maybe some judgment about myself for having done that. And then the next moment say, well, maybe they were to blame for having said that in the first place, and on and on. This linkage of experience after experience, moment after moment, generates a sense of continuity. And when we add a constant self-referential commentary, then we could consider that by referring all of our experience to us hundreds or thousands of times a day, every day for decades, it's not too amazing that we actually think there is an us. To use a silly metaphor, let's say we have a donut. Well, we actually probably think we see a hole. Well, there's not a hole. There's just space there. But by being surrounded by all this matter, we actually experience a hole. In a similar way, if we point toward ourself over and over again, sooner or later, we just take it for granted that there is a self there. This continuity of self, which is maintained through linking experiences, through concepts, through patterns of behavior, attention to aspects of our experience that seem to be relevant to ourselves, engaging the world with all sorts of dramas about ourselves, having issues with our self-worth or lack of worth, trying to heal our issues, all seems to be part of the creation of a sense of having a solid, significant, continuing self. From a Buddhist point of view, this fantasy, which doesn't mean there's not this sort of appearance of a self, but this fantasy of being a solid and therefore alienated self, actually is what gives rise to unnecessary suffering and confusion in our life. So from a fruitional point of view, one of the very powerful practices that we can explore is that of immediacy, where whenever it occurs to us, we bring our attention into our immediate experience and go as deeply as possible into what is most fundamentally true in this moment. And what we find very quickly is that our interpretations of what we are experiencing are not what is most fundamentally happening at that moment. deeper than our interpretations are our feelings, deeper than our feelings are our sensations. And we could even go beyond that to just the experience of energy, intense energy, and even to aliveness. When we practice immediacy, we start to challenge and dissolve the apparent linkage between moment after moment of experience. We start to make it difficult to maintain a story about ourselves and our position in the world. So one metaphor for trying to understand the difference between linking experiences and allowing our experience to just arise in an environment of space or openness, no commentary, no discussion. One metaphor might be what I do at some teaching situations where I will put a row of dominoes on the floor, and of course, when we tip over the first domino, the rest of them go clack, 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 and it's very entertaining, it's fun, and to me it's a very useful display of how we're all constantly relating one moment of experience as if it's necessarily connected to another, because it looks that way. But then I will take the dominoes and just move them further apart on the floor. Same pattern, same organization, but then when I knock over the first domino, it just falls on the floor. It doesn't reach to the next domino. It just happens in space. At that moment, it's clear that what appeared to be linkage, causation, that is necessary is not necessary at all. It just comes from a too close of connection from one moment to the other, and we make that connection mostly through our interpretations. Another way of talking about it could be that we can understand that we make these connections through mostly our concepts, our interpretations. We also, in a different way, make these connections through emotional reactivity. But if we imagine that a concept basically is an experience that we put a little box around and then carry through time, we can see that we have to make any concept very generic. If it's a tree and we want to relate it to another tree, it has to be a very generalized tree. So we're always linking moment after moment in ways that have to be generic. They can't really be unique to the moment. So if we understand that the sense of self actually is a representation that we carry over time, we can see that unfortunately all of us have to create a generic sense of self, a very generalized, not very interesting, sort of down to the lowest common denominator almost, sense of self in order to carry it over time. If we experience every moment in its rich uniqueness, it's very difficult to link that to the next moment in a familiar way. So if I have a moment in which I drop a glass, that experience is completely unique and complete in itself. In the next moment, I'll probably have some emotional reaction to that, some shock, some fear, some anger pop up or something. It's possible just to let that emotional response be complete in itself. But most of us, of course, will interpret the disturbance as if it's about our having dropped the glass. One of the effects of meditation practice is to start to place moments of experience in an environment of greater space. And we find actually that it is harder and harder to completely believe in our stories about our experience then. So if we really want to challenge our story about ourselves, some people would say karmic momentum or historic conditioning, in a very immediate, powerful way, we practice immediacy. We bring our attention into every moment of experience without telling ourselves what it's about, just experiencing it. This practice of immediacy, just to be clear, is not the experience of awareness. It's just a practice that invites an investigation of awareness. It clears away some of our confusion. It helps us tolerate not always having our experience be about ourselves. So sometimes when I'm working with people, I suggest that perhaps even their emotions are not about themselves. Of course, this is an alien idea, so I think of it more as planting a seed, but as a metaphor, we could think of our emotions sort of like the weather. The weather happens, we have to deal with it. It affects us, but it's not about us. Our experiencing, perhaps, is something we have to deal with. It affects us, but possibly our experiencing is not about us. Maybe that's an extra commentary that we add on just so quickly and so habitually that we're not even aware of it. So, for example, we might say, oh, it's a beautiful day. That doesn't mean that the day has an inherent quality of beauty. It just means we like it. What a great meal. What a lousy driver. We're always projecting our preferences onto our experience, external reality, internal reality, as if our experiencing actually has something to do with us, our preferences. So we're always basically trying to have experience we like and get rid of experience we don't like. It's a classic sort of Buddhist description of unnecessary suffering. But as we start to practice immediacy, embodiment, kindness toward everything that arises, we'll talk about that in a bit. As we practice immediacy, we find less and less and less evidence that any of our experience is about us. That begins to help us with practicing an attitude of non-bias. I am willing to feel happy. I'm willing to feel sad. I'm willing to be healthy. I'm willing to be dying because that's what's happening. We start to boycott or go beneath the automatic, unconscious addition of preferences to experience. It doesn't make our experience suddenly happy. It just means that we are less confused. And from the point of view of a fruitional practice, it makes it easier to ask the question, well, what is aware of this display? What's the nature of awareness? Which, of course, has to be an experiential investigation more than an intellectual one. As we train ourselves to stay more and more present in immediate experience without interpretations, without trying to hang on or push away, we actually become more capable of investigating our experience because it seems to be less sort of loaded with survival level drama. If all of our experience is about us, about our preferences, then we're always sort of hypervigilant on some level. If we start to experience this display as just having its own life, it becomes safer to investigate it. When we investigate experience from the attitude of immediacy, no interpretations, what we find is that our experience continues to be very vivid in its appearance, but upon investigation we find no essential nature to that appearance. That is a difficult concept, so I'll try to give some metaphors at least. If we swing a sparkler at night, we see a ring of light. It would be silly to say we don't see a ring of light. We do. Retinal retention, the way our minds organize experience, it's there in our experience. Upon investigation, though, we're not going to find a ring of light. We just find a point of light in constant repetitive motion. So there's a vivid appearance, and there's no essential nature that we can ever find. If we see a rainbow, we see a rainbow. It would be silly to say we don't see a rainbow. Upon investigation, we never are going to find a rainbow. It's all relational. It's the way the sun rays bounce around inside the raindrops and then the angle of the observer. If we spin a color wheel, we're going to see white. If it slows down, we're never going to see white. We're going to see the primary colors. If we look at a photograph, we're going to see a picture. It would be silly to say we don't. Upon investigation, we're just going to find pixels and then molecules and so on. If we look at this table in front of us, we can say, well, that seems pretty real. But if we consider that human sensory experiencing is perhaps not the gold standard for the universe, the only criteria for reality, we could imagine being an aware photon, let's say, hypothetically. An aware photon is never going to find a table. It's just going to find a slightly more dense cloud of energy. So these are all sort of suggestions about what could be an intellectual understanding of a very basic Buddhist concept from a fruitional view of appearance emptiness, meaning that we are always going to have vivid appearance arising, and upon investigation, we will never find an essential nature to any of that experience. Then the very interesting question, of course, is, well, what about the observer of all of this experience? Well, yes, it seems to be that there's a vivid appearance of self. It would be silly to sort of try to get rid of that. And upon investigation, we may never find any solid, continual self we can get a hold of. So we appreciate and work with the appearance, and we gradually stop taking this appearance as if it's about us, as if it's something that we have to do something with. As we allow experience to be just as it is, we find, from this point of view, that all experience tends to just arise out of we don't know where. It's really sort of mysterious, but it arises into our awareness. It's there for a while, and then it dissolves, it falls apart. This is always happening. We're never going to find, actually, any content that's permanent. So this is another Buddhist concept, which is that experience is self-liberating, that we don't have to do anything about our experience. It will take care of itself. It's only when we intervene and try to manage our experience that it seems to get frozen, and then we have sort of a ongoing chronic condition to work with. Most of us seem to have an intuition that moving in this direction actually is rather disturbing, because it turns out that awareness provides absolutely no support for personal identity. So as we move toward immediacy, toward considering that all of our experience just will take care of itself, we don't have to make it a project, that in any given moment we don't have an alternative to the way things are, we might as well commit to working with things as we experience them, we find less and less material to support our familiar dramas. These familiar dramas we talked about in the last session are very understandable given our history. They had origins on a relative level in our health, our integrity. But for some people, not everyone, as an adult, we might consider as our highest priority investigating whether at any given moment there's actually a problem. To the extent that this investigation is anxiety-provoking, then often we will find we have very contradictory feelings about moving in this direction. And in fact, on a more daily, ordinary level for most people, from this point of view, actually are invested in their problems. From the developmental point of view, we understood this investment as arising from our best efforts to protect ourselves, to take care of ourselves, but now out of date. From a fruitional point of view, we start to consider problems actually as entertainment. A lot of people don't like that idea, of course, but once again, we could return to the metaphor of the movie. Most people are not going to go pay $10 for 2 hours of well-being. It's boring. They'd walk out of the theater. What we pay money for is problems, romantic problems, James Bond problems, whatever. That's what entertains us. It captures us. We want to get captured. But most people don't consider the possibility that their dramas about abandonment, about, let's say, being a dependent person for me, about whether I'm ever going to get enlightened, whatever, actually can be understood as entertainment. That we have sort of a fascination with getting captured by a story. And the best way to get captured, of course, is when we can claim that our survival's at risk. That's what's most capturing, actually. So in my clinical work, I'm always, every day, of course, many times hearing people talk about their experience in a way that implies, they're not aware of it, but it implies, if I had to feel this feeling, if this happened in my life, I would die. Something horrible would happen. This is a survival level issue. This is really, really important. I have to fix this issue. I have to get clear about it. I have to understand my past, whatever. And people often don't really like the idea, if it's presented, that maybe they're entertaining themselves with this claim that there's a problem. Because in the immediate moment, where's the problem? This doesn't mean, of course, not to address our real-life circumstances intelligently. We should pay our bills, be kind to our kids and our partners, so on. Our life will work better. But in the immediate moment, where's the problem? Where's anything that's missing? But again, if there's no problem, there's no entertainment. In fact, that's one way of understanding one of the effects of meditation. Trungpa Rinpoche talked about a stage of meditation that after some initial period of very intense, dramatic, disturbing experience arising over and over again, after a while, we actually become bored with it. It's so repetitive. It's happened so many times, but in meditation, we're more aware of it than in daily life. So he talked about a phase of hot boredom in which we're sitting there, and it's okay. We're not having a lot of drama arise, but we're sort of antsy. We want to get out of there. We want the session to end. If we hang in there, we might enter an experience of cool boredom. It's okay. We're sitting there. We're not so antsy. We can do it, but it's sort of boring. It's not that interesting. But if we hang in there, it's possible that we start to experience every moment of experience as just inherently interesting because it's full of aliveness, not because of anything it has to do with us. But to use the movie example again, if you're watching a movie and it becomes very, very, very boring, you're in danger of waking up out of that trance state that you've paid money to enter. So if a movie has a lot of boring aspects in it, it's called an art movie. Certain people go to it. But mostly people don't want to feel bored as entertainment. They want problems. They want drama. They want challenges, risks, things like that. Another metaphor might be to imagine that we are all just being swept along by this stream of experiencing, of time, of experience. We feel not in control, which is true. So in our minds, out of our anxiety, we pretend that we've dammed up the river. And now we feel sort of safe. We feel like we're in a little calm pool now. But after our initial experience of safety, now we start feeling like there's a lack of aliveness. We feel stagnant. And so then we start a drama about, well, should I have more aliveness in my life or should I have more safety in my life, which is a very common sort of drama. But we forget that this is all hallucinatory. We're actually still in the stream, floating downstream, but we're in a hallucinatory trance sort of state where we're pretending that we're in this dilemma between aliveness and security. Unfortunately, we're still in the stream and we're not even very fully present, so, we could bang our head on a rock. We could get in trouble because we're not committed to just being present. So even though there is an entertaining quality to taking all of our experience very seriously, as if it's about us, as if there's always some vague, important survival level drama at risk, actually skillful means seem to arise out of being connected with what's true. So being present, training ourselves to not add self-referential commentary all the time, seems to actually give rise to a more skillful engagement with our life, which usually means our life will work better. So considering this view, we might say, well, now what? It sounds okay, but, I just can't suddenly walk around in the environment of awareness. Well, then we find various practices that might invite that type of experience. My preference is to invite somebody who has that interest to consider what I would call unconditional practices. Practices like an unconditional commitment to the truth of our immediate experience, whatever it is. Unconditional embodiment at all times. Unconditional kindness, or even love, to all of our experiencing. Unconditional immediacy. To me, these practices have a deep sort of energetic resonance with the nature of awareness. It's almost like if you took two tuning forks, tuned to the same frequency, and hit one, the other starts to vibrate through a process of resonance. If somebody's playing a sitar, apparently there is one line of strings that you pluck and another line completely identical that you never touch, but playing the first set of strings produces a resonance in the second and produces this very rich sort of overtone. So my preference is to invite people to practice in ways that have the greatest resonance with a fruitional sort of attitude that might invite more and more frequently conscious participation in what is already always there, which is our awareness. Other practices are, of course, very valid and useful. We can practice in therapy, setting boundaries, working with our self-image, understanding our history. In spiritual work, we can practice returning to our breath, living a decent, respectful lifestyle. But all of those practices tend to be based on an idea that our immediate experiencing is somehow problematic. It's not quite what we want. What we want is in the future. So from a certain point of view, people actually can get addicted to the path, addicted to therapy, addicted to path practices in spiritual work, where we get a lot of gratification out of our efforts to reach a goal in the future. But from my training, it's perhaps more direct to commit to immediacy, commit to embodiment, commit to unconditional kindness, as if there's nothing missing, nothing problematic about any moment. Again, that doesn't create awareness, it just creates a condition that seems to invite awareness. So I often invite people to consider these practices, these unconditional practices, as ways to relate directly to their immediate experiencing. Perhaps I could say a little bit about each of these. We've talked a bit about unconditional kindness, and unconditional actually means unconditional. We practice kindness toward everything that arises in our awareness, whether we like it or don't like it or feel neutral about it. Often in our culture, my experience is that people doing spiritual practices tend toward clarity more than heart-centered practices. So awareness often is approached through sort of a more mental experience of clarity. But in my opinion, the practice of unconditional kindness often is much more powerful even than clarity. That has to do with an active, heart-opening attitude toward our experience, where we feel a sense of yes, not just say yes, but feel a sense of yes. And that's much more disturbing for most of us to feel yes to horrible feelings than just to be aware of them. And even beyond the kindness, it's even more powerful to practice a sense of sweet love, as if we're actually holding what we don't want to feel in the sense of sweetness. When I was preparing for this taping session, which is new to me and anxiety-provoking, a while ago, it occurred to me, I should practice holding my sense of panic with a sense of sweet love. It didn't make the panic go away, but something very significant shifted for me at that time, where it was okay if I felt the panic, because I was ready at any second to practice an attitude of loving this panic, recognizing it's me, it's not something that's happening to me. Unconditional immediacy, we've talked about, has to do with going deeper and deeper and deeper into an investigation of what is most true in this moment. That's all an approximation. I don't think there's any such thing as a moment, actually, but it's a direction. And the more immediate we are in our experiencing, the less sense of problem we find, the less reference to a self we find. We don't find any evidence of anything missing. We don't find any evidence of our worth as a person. No evidence of anything being permanent. The practice of unconditional embodiment is a very large issue. We'll talk about that in a future session. But at this point, we could say that the more that we can bring our attention to immediate sensation level experience, the more difficult it is to be captured by our interpretations. What usually happens for most of us is that we feel very vulnerable, disturbed, and in a fraction of a moment, without thinking about it, we dissociate, we abandon our own immediate embodied experience and jump up into interpretations. At least in this culture, that's our basic escape from immediacy. What's waiting for us in our interpretations is our conditioned history. So then we tend to interpret our immediate experience based on our historic conditioning. And once again, that provides endless opportunities to link a story together. Oh, I'm a clumsy person, or gosh, why would somebody leave that glass so close to the counter? I'm so tired of everybody not being responsible. I mean, we can just go on endlessly linking immediate stories with familiar stories. But when we stay in our immediate embodied experience, it's very difficult to link anything because it's very unique. It's always in motion. There's no such thing as a permanent sensation. There's no evidence in sensations about anything that's self-referential, actually. There's no such sensation as shame or guilt or anything like that. So these practices all support an attitude of letting go of our fascination with our drama about who we are. As we let go of this drama, a more spacious awareness just arises. And in that more expansive awareness, if we want, we can begin to investigate this very interesting question of, what is aware? Has awareness never been there, or is it always there? What's the nature of awareness? So we've discussed some practices that I feel are very resonant with the fruitional view. In our next discussion, we'll continue talking about some more practices, therapeutic techniques. But I thought it would be perhaps helpful before we end this discussion to say a little bit about why I feel so passionate about this work, why I think about this every day, about is there some way to help people who are experiencing a lot of confusion and suffering feel some relief, some freedom in their life that may not require going to therapy 4 times a week for 10 years. For me, a number of years ago, something shifted, some psychic center of gravity, some shift where I would say before that time, my baseline, my sort of what I returned to was still feeling like, to some extent, problematic, that I was trying to improve, trying to wake up, trying to feel completely at peace. Out of that ground of, we could say, dissatisfaction, or more precisely, fundamental aggression toward reality, moments of clarity, peace, freedom would arise, but my baseline seemed to be a sense of some type of dissatisfaction. When a certain type of shift happened, my experience since then has been that my baseline, what I return to spontaneously, off and on every day, is an experience of open awareness, freedom, well-being, where it makes sense to me to be kind to people, rather than doing it as a practice. And out of that baseline of well-being, moments of being captured by historically conditioned issues, captured by disturbing emotions, continue to arise sometimes, but not frequently. This shift has been so powerful, and especially as a therapist, I'm so interested and committed to how might any of us invite others to investigate their experience in a way that's not a constant postponing of freedom. What are a variety of ways in which we can sort of cut to the chase and see what's true right now in the present moment? See if there's a problem. See if this fruitional view has any accuracy, any usefulness. I know that in my case, this shift seems to have arisen out of many years of commitment to personal therapy and Buddhist practice. I believe it had a lot to do with the good fortune of relating to some very wakeful, kind teachers. But my personal opinion is that waking up is not caused by meditation. It's not a causal experience. It's just fortunate. Christians might say grace. It happens, but not because we can engineer it. But Baker Roshi, an American Zen teacher, once said that enlightenment is an accident, but meditation makes us accident-prone. Personally, I would say that good therapeutic work also makes us accident-prone in that way. My experience is that waking up seems to happen along a continuum for most people, not just some sudden black and white change. As I have felt more wakeful, I have found that my own conditioned history doesn't suddenly stop, that I still have my personality style, I still have my core vulnerabilities, but I don't seem to be adding to the drama anymore. I don't really mind that I have my conditioned history, my confusion, my messiness as a human to work with. In fact, it's actually very interesting. From a ground of freedom, it turns out there's no problem about being fully human. So this discussion today hopefully has not implied some sort of goal of transcendence or invulnerability where we're trying to rise above our humanness. In fact, it's completely the opposite. The point, as I understand it, is to go so deeply into our confusion, our panic, our rage, our grief, our fear, that we find out for ourselves in a way that we have no more doubt about that actually there's no essential nature to any of these very vivid appearances. That not only gives us confidence in working with our experience of being another confused human, but it also gives, I believe, rise to a spontaneous sense of compassion or curiosity, interest in others who we can see not only have real pain in their life, but are creating unnecessary suffering on top of it. So this is an issue that I literally think about every day. I'm very curious about how might we help others? How can we, first of all, help ourselves probably, but how can we help others to just cut to the chase, stop postponing being present, not wait for some future enlightenment or wait for our past traumas to heal before we're completely, fully committed to being present. Because that ground of embodied presence actually is what gives rise to compassion. We find that there is pain in our life, and that is completely workable. It's not a problem to have pain. And just spontaneously our heart begins to extend to others who not only have real pain in their life, but are adding all sorts of complicated, unnecessary confusions. So my hope is that this discussion of the fruitional view, even though it tends to be abstract and difficult, might at least suggest a direction of inquiry, experiential inquiry, where we can honor our conditioned history and perhaps gradually not only not take it so seriously as if it's about us and our worth as a person, but actually to find some sense of appreciation and even enjoyment in what we would call neurosis. So our discussion will continue with an investigation about the dialogue between the developmental and fruitional views, how these views can be used in therapy and in one's personal life as a very rich sort of friction or dialogue that's never resolvable, but in which each approach helps to address some of the blind spots of the other.